UV mapping. Okay. So UV mapping is the process of applying a material texture to a particular spot or placement on a UV model, on a polygon model. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to learn how to draw. Okay. So we're going to use this program called photopea.com. It's a raster-based drawing tool. So it's a bit like Photoshop. If you know how to use Photoshop or some other drawing tool and you want to use that, cool. Welcome to do that in this course. I'm showing this because this is a program you can run for free at home and it doesn't require any installation or anything. So this is a browser-based program. You can access it by going to photopea.com. And I'm just going to go through some basics of like how to draw with it. So for instance, I opened up a Photoshop document, PSD. The program. First thing to do, well, actually, I'll go through some of the tools real quick. These are menu items. Menu items are like, making a new file, editing a file. There's image data over here. Toolbox. Toolbox, like it sounds like, has tools that we can work with. This is our composition. This is when we work, what we see is going to be here. And the other major area are the panels that provide additional information. Not that you care, but over here is where ads go. So if you have the free version, this will be ads. That'll always kind of be on the left side here. Oops. All right, let's navigate. I'm going to zoom in here. So I'm going to grab the zoom tool, which is this magnifying tool here. So if you open up a composition, you want to zoom in. I can click on this and then click, 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 click to zoom in. I want to demagnify or zoom out up here in my tool options, which is usually right at the top. There's a little minus sign, meaning it demagnifies. Another way to do this is if you click and zoom in, I can hold down the Option or the Alt key on my keyboard, and that turns into a minus, and I can zoom in and out. I can also use the keyboard shortcut Command plus, Command minus. Oops, sorry, I lied. Or did I? Sorry, it's Control plus, is it? Maybe not. That's going to affect the browser itself. I guess it does work, but just make sure you're on top of this and not the browser. So Command plus zooms in, Command minus zooms out. I would probably just use the zoom tool here. If you're zoomed in, you can pan around the document by using the hand tool here, which allows you to pull the document. You can also keyboard shortcut as the space bar. So at any point you grab the space bar, you can move around the document. This panel isn't usually open by default, but there's a panel under Window called the Navigator. Navigator tool is kind of like a combination of the zoom and the hand tool together, in that you can zoom in and out of your document. If you're zoomed in about over 100%, you'll be able to see this little viewfinder. If I put my cursor over this, it turns into the hand icon, and I can pan around my document. Let's talk about setting up a document of my own. Set up a new document in Photopea. I'm going to go to File and then New. So I'm going to give you a bunch of options here. These are kind of like templates. We really just kind of want this one over here on the right. The first thing is I can give this a name, otherwise it just defaults to new project. So I'll call this my project. Next is I can set up dimensions. Okay. When we work inside of Blender, you're probably going to want your documents to be powers of 2. What that means is like 516, 1024, 2056 by 2056. Reason is anything that's a power of 2 calculates quicker because it's power of 2 and every computers are binary. If I wanted to set this up to say 1024 by 1024 pixels, I could do something like that for height and width. Now you could technically set it to other measurements because, at least for this class, everything we're doing is digital, meaning that it's all within Blender and eventually it's exported. You might as well keep it pixels because that's how everything on a computer is measured. You're working outside, if you were printing something for this program, you may want to work in inches or something better. For this course, there's really no reason to not use pixels. Next is something called resolution or PPI, sometimes referred to as pixel per inch or PPI. The only thing you need to really know for this, at least for this class, is you want it to be about 72 pixels per inch. That's the minimum resolution. If you had something lower than that, the image might come through a little distorted. There's not really a good reason to increase the resolution. The reason for that would normally be printing reasons, but since we're never printing in this course, that doesn't really matter. It will only make the file size bigger if you increase the resolution. There's also this background color, defaults to white. Don't worry about this. You can just keep it as RGB. Keep this at 8 bits. I don't really want to get into that right now, but there's really no reason to raise it. And I'm going to hit create, and then that's what makes my document. Okay. Notice that in Photopea, kind of tabs when I create compositions. Let's talk about drawing. What I'm going to do is, if I want to draw, I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. When I draw, my color is going to be based on whatever my color is here. This is my foreground color. This is my background color. It's default, for some reason it's red. Let's say I wanted to switch it from red. I could click on this. That would actually open up a color picker. I don't know if I have this in any slides, but let me give you the rough rundown of how color works. I guess I don't. Maybe I do. Color is sorted, or there's 3 properties that make up color. Oops, Premiere Pro going on. First is what's called hue. Hue is like your Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Your base color. Now, there's more to life than hue. If you ever tried painting a room, you know there's no such thing as this red paint. You go to Home Depot and there's many variations of red paint, right? So we need more properties to split up a color. So this is my hue over here: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. But there's other properties we can play around with. One is called saturation. Saturation is how intense a color is. A high saturated color would be like a neon color, okay? Like, I don't know, that red, it's not neon, but that red fire, alarm, that's really saturated. Something like this, super saturated, okay? A low saturated would be like pastel, very light color, Like this paint here, very low saturated, kind of red. Finally, we have how much brightness, sometimes referred to as lightness, sometimes referred to as gamma, which is how much light is being added to the color. Color is all based off of light. Without light, there is no color. That's why when it's 2 a.m. and it's pitch black and there's no light source like the sun or a light bulb or anything, you can't see anything. Okay, there's no color. When you add light, that's the more light you add to something, the brighter it is, or more the colors can brighten or stand out. So the way it works here is if I choose, like, say, a red, this is a low saturated red, and then it kind of goes higher and higher and higher to like a very saturated kind of fire engine red. In terms of gamma or brightness, it goes from bottom up, where this is pure darkness. Black darkness is the absence of light. And then I kind of keep adding light to this color, and the color goes from like a dark red. Oh, that's to like, sorry about that. It's all broken. Goes from like a dark red to like a medium red to like a brighter red. Okay. In terms of your brush is up here. If you click on it, you can change the size of the brush to make it bigger or smaller. The bigger the brush, the more you can paint. It's kind of like, think about the difference between a small like watercolor brush versus like a hand roller for painting a wall. The hand roller is bigger, so it covers more. In terms of hardness, hardness is how crisp the edges of your brush are. So if I click, this is like a hard edge. If it make it 50% hardness, it's a semi-hard edge. And then if I set it to 0% hardness, that's basically very soft edge. It becomes kind of like more like a watercolor. I can also, whoops. I don't know if there's any default brushes. Maybe we need to. There we go. You probably have some default brushes like this. Some of them are textured brushes, so they, instead of just a circle or a square, it's more of a texture design. You can also actually load brushes too. There are places online where you can find brushes and load them into the project or into Photopea. So for instance, if I go to Brush Easy, which is a website, let's say I wanted, I don't know, ink splatter. So I'll type in ink splatter. And make sure it's under file type. It's called a brush. And I'm going to try these. I'm going to download this. It'll probably give you a pop-up, an ad, because that's money. They give you stuff for free. I'm going to download this. And we are using what are called basically Adobe Photoshop brushes, or an ABR file. So it has to be an ABR file. And if I come back to here, I can load this in by clicking on this little arrow here and going to load ABR. I can then find that file, hit OK, and then, oh, there it is. Okay, it's just, I don't love, okay, so I did have more brushes. I just had to scroll down to get them. Here are my ink brushes, and, ink splatter. All right. Any questions? Anything I've talked about? What's up?
For the brushes thing, I know this Photoshop, but would you put those down this thing?
Probably not because they're raster based.
No.
There are, I know what you're talking about. You can build brushes and people do it, but it's not an easy. You're getting a file on that, and it's something. Any other questions? And it wouldn't work in this, this is raster based. All right, want you guys to try that out. That's just 1, 2, and 3. You can access this program by going to photop.com. Like I said, when it comes to this class, I don't, if you want to use Photop, great. If you want to use Photoshop, great. You need Photoshop on your own outside of class, obviously. We have Photoshop for these programs, here, but if you wanted to use Photoshop outside, you have to have your own legal copy of it. I'll use this one because it's free. It's also browser-based, so it doesn't require installation or anything like that. And to be honest, for what we do in this class, it's good enough, basically. A lot of what I teach you can basically be done also in Photoshop.
I have a question about exercise 2.
Sure.
When I open up exercise 2, it looks like this, and
This might be set to another, but what I would suggest is you can just view it, I think, it should be saved as a PDF. See if you can set up a document like that.
right?
And you can do that by going in Photop under File, New, and just, putting in the settings that I recommend. Now, obviously, this is going to be a quick overview. If you really want to learn more about raster editing, like, working with photos and such, I recommend taking a Photoshop class that we offer here. This is just quick enough to let you get by, for this class. I don't have time to really teach you Photoshop or whatever and Blender. I barely have enough time to teach you Blender. At least enough to do, because when we get to UV editing, you have to know how to draw, essentially, or at least know how to work with an image editing program, at least on a basic level. Keep doing that. All right, one more minute and we'll kind of move on. I'm sorry. Hey, thank you so much. Yeah, we'll keep in touch. Oh, thank you, of course. All right, let me move on. I'll talk about a couple more tools we can use for drawing. I'm going to go about halfway down and I'm gonna click and hold on this thing that looks like a gray square. And if I click and hold, it should take me to something called the paint bucket tool. What the paint bucket tool is trying to do is fill in areas of an image based on color. So if I came in here with a brush, I could like try to kind of go along the edges there. Like, let's say I was trying to do that, but it's kind of hard to do that. So what I'm going to do is instead of trying to paint over it, I'm going to use this tool here. And the way that it works is when I use this tool, it's going to sample. But anyway, what it's going to try to do is sample this color and then kind of go out in all directions and try to find other pixels that are similar color. In other words, if I sample a red, it's going to go out and try to sample other pixels that are also red and replace them with whatever the foreground color is, which currently is set to blue. So if I click on this, you can see how it filled that whole area based on blue. Now, I'm going to undo this by going to Edit, Undo, or Command Z. Why did it only do this part and not the other? The answer to that is when you have color, color is also based off light. Okay, so when you have this red, there's red, but there's also like darker red where there's less light hitting it. There's also brighter red where the light is bouncing off. We call these like shades essentially. So we have this thing called tolerance right up here under my tool options. Essentially what tolerance does, and I may have a slide of this, I'm not sure. Maybe not. Anyway. A slide, what it does is it tries to, that 40 number represents the number of luminance shades I can select. Without getting like too technical, if they were going to measure my red in terms of darkness to lightness, it's super dark red to a super bright red. It goes from 0 to 255. Why 255? That seems really arbitrary. Well, this is one slot plus 255 slots is 256, and 256 is the power of 2, so it's easier for computers to measure it that way. And the way it works is that 40 represents a range of luminance that it can select. So let's just pretend that I've chosen medium red. It would choose 40 below and 40 above. But that would leave kind of the brighter and the darker ones. So if I actually increase that tolerance and do this again, you can see it gets a larger area because it's accepting more luminance in what it's allowed to affect. Okay. Where the paint bucket can come in handy, and we'll talk about this later, is if I have my own layer, I can actually use the paint bucket to fill it in with a solid color, because the reason why is it's sampling this, it's all the same shade, which is nothing. So it selects the entire thing and fills it in with a color. Let's talk about creating a gradient. A gradient is a blend between two or more colors. What I can do is if I click and hold, I'm going to grab the gradient tool. By default, the gradient is a blend between your foreground and your background color. Okay, this is my foreground color. This is my background color. So I'd set that up first before I use the tool. Like say, I don't know, yellow and blue. What I'm going to do now is if I click and drag, I create this line, and that's my gradient from blue to yellow. Okay. This is what we call a linear gradient because it goes in a line. Left to right, right to left, top to bottom, bottom to top. I changed. There's other types of gradients, like I could use a radial gradient. A radial gradient doesn't go from left to right or up to down. It goes from in to out. So right now this is going to go from yellow to blue. So if I click and drag, it starts at yellow and it goes blue throughout the whole way. Photopea also has built-in, if you want to create your own custom gradient, I can click on this thing at the top left. And if I click on this, it would open up my gradient editor. These little squares at the bottom, we call these color stops. So I can click on these, and then down here, I can click to choose a new color. I can also add colors to this gradient by clicking right below the line. When I do that, it adds a new color stop. It shows here, double clicking, and then I could switch it to a new color. When I'm done, I can hit OK. And then now when I use this, it's going to use my 4-color gradient that I've created. If you click on this little arrow that's pointing downward, there's some preset ones you can use as well. Like this one. Oh, I think I went over the custom gradient, but. All right, let's talk about selecting. Photopea is what we would call a raster program. What it means is that my image is built out of what are referred to as pixels. Pixels are so something like Photoshop or Photopea is what we call a raster graphic, and a raster graphic is an image comprised of pixels arranged in rows and columns. Okay. So this image, which is a actually it's a PSD, each one of these is a pixel. Each pixel can have its own unique color if I want to. Like that one can be yellow. This one can be red. If I get like a couple of them together, I can make letter A, right? If I get enough of them together of different color, I can get a more complex image. Now, in any kind of raster-based program, it's about telling the program which pixels do we want to work with. Okay, and that's what we call a selection tool. A selection tool's job is to select the pixels we want to change or alter reducing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab. We're going to use this tool called the selection tool. Or actually, we could probably even use object selection. That's a newer one. Now we use the quick selection tool. The quick selection tool allows you to select something. And I'm going to click on this blue fish, and I'm going to click and drag. And see how it creates that selection of that sort of dashed line there? That is my selection. Okay, which means I can do something with it now. In this case, what I'm going to do is use it as a holding place for my drawing. So now that this is selected, if I wanted to paint with my my paintbrush, it'll only paint inside of my selection. If you make a selection and you don't like the selection, you can deselect it by going to select, deselect, or Command or Control D. If you want to add the selection, there's a plus sign here with my quick selection tool, and I can add, which in this case made too much. There's a minus that would subtract a little bit. You can see how it's subtracting. It's not a great, it's kind of being a little, but that would allow me to do that. Next tool I'm going to show you is the smudge tool, which is this one here. It's supposed to be a finger, kind of looks kind of weird, but it's supposed to be a finger like smudging it. The smudge tool is kind of like, imagine if your photo or your image or your drawing was like made of chalk or craypa, and you could literally take your finger and kind of smudge it, you know what I mean? That's what this tool does. So here I got this picture of a butterfly. I can make my brush bigger or smaller. And the smudge tool allows you to literally kind of smudge the edges, kind of like they're made of clay, or not clay, but craypa, or like paint, you know, like wet paint, basically. The intensity of this is based off what's called strength. The higher the strength, the more you can kind of pull the paint, so to speak. The lower this number, the less you will pull. So it depends how intense you want this to be. All right, last thing I'll talk about, let you guys try this out, is what's called the eraser tool. I'm going to zoom in here. If I use my eraser tool, which is brush base, oops, I guess you can see that I am erasing from this. So it's a brush based tool. So if you make the brush bigger or smaller, that would affect. Is there no revert option? If this brush had more or less of a hardness, you can see I'm getting kind of a faded kind of side there. All right, any questions about anything I did here? All right, why don't you guys try that out? That was 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Yeah, good. Here's selecting.
Hello, Francesca. Maybe if you said that you said these things too, they're going. I already have to do on the part. Yeah. Oh. One more. Okay. You guys go together. I did the two in my car. In my car, I did one of it. You guys go together. You fit into one. And you guys.
You want good, you know.
Another couple minutes, finish up talking about rasters. Let's see. Let's see. All right, let's finish up talking about some of the basics of working with a photo editor or a drawing program like Photopea. One of the things that makes Photopea or Photoshop or other tools like it, Clip Studio Pro or something like it, very powerful, is the ability to separate content from each other. What this means is like we can paint something on one area and then basically create a second area so we don't interact with the two. We don't affect one. When we affect one, we don't necessarily affect the other. And that's really beneficial. So there's this idea of layers and that they kind of stack up to form a more complex composition. So this is exercise 10. And it should be open, but you have this area called layers. And the way that it works is this is all content in my composition. It starts from the bottom and it like stacks on top of each other like a sandwich. All right, so I got this background layer, I got a butterfly, Frankenstein, a circle, and then a bird. At any point, if I want to turn off a layer without, so I can see what the composition looks like without that piece of content, without necessarily like, erasing it with an eraser, I can use this visibility toggle there. So let's say I wanted to see what my composition looks like without the bird. I could just do that. Turn it back on, like that. It comes right back. If you want to set it so you don't accidentally, if you want to move stuff around, there's a move tool that lets you move around the contents of that particular layer by selecting the layer. You can create new layers if you want to. At the very bottom of my layer thing here, there's this thing that kind of looks like a little page. That's create new layer. Oops. That'll make a brand new layer. I click on that, and then I could, if I wanted to, draw or paint into that layer. So maybe I want to use my brush tool and draw something. I'll rename the layer by double clicking on it, calling it like red paint or something like that. To make a layer more dominant, you can bring it to the top of the stack. So for instance, right now my red paint is behind Frankenstein. If I wanted this to be all the way visible, I could take this and drag it up in the layer stack. This is now on top, so it's blocking the stuff behind it, or I could drag it down so that it's behind other elements by lowering it in the stack. If I want to get rid of a layer, I could click on this icon here that kind of looks like a little trash can or waste paper basket, whatever you want to call it. And that would delete my layer. Okay. You can also duplicate layers, which means you take whatever the layer content is and you make a new layer with the exact same content. A couple ways to do this. You could go under the layer menu, duplicate layer. You could also take the layer and drag it to the new layer icon. And what'll happen is you'll see that it makes a copy of that. Why would you want to do that? Well, maybe you're going to make a dramatic change to your layer. You may want to have a backup copy of it just in case it doesn't work out, that you can delete the one that you messed up and you still have a copy of it. You know what I mean? Finally, if you want to lock a layer, locking a layer prevents you from moving it. So I wouldn't be able to move it or edit it in any way. I can click on this little icon here that looks like a padlock. Click on that. A little padlock should appear to the right of that particular layer. That means that layer is locked and I can't move it or edit it in any way. So if I try to use a move tool on the Frankenstein, it won't let me do that. If I tried to use like the eraser tool, it would not. It's even telling me this layer is locked. Okay, I can unlock it just by clicking on the icon again, and that removes that. You may want to organize things into what are called groups or layers, as they call them, groups here, or they call it a folder. Okay, Photoshop calls it a group, they call it a folder. It's the same thing. Essentially what it does is it organizes layers, kind of like how you might organize files on your computer into a folder. You can organize your layers here into a folder. I can click on this folder, and maybe for the sake of argument, I would like the circle and the bird together, but not the Frankenstein and the butterfly in the background. I want those to be separate from each other. So I'm going to call this like foreground, and I'll take the bird and I'm going to drag it into that folder. And what happens is you kind of see how it indents itself, right? That means it's inside of this foreground folder, which means if I select the folder itself and I use like a move tool, I can actually, oops, and I turn off auto select, it would move both of them. Okay. So I can group these together. I can move them individually by using the move tool up here, or if I select the group, I can move both. Okay, which could be nice. Sometimes you want to work with two at the same time. If you're going to try to do that, just make sure the option auto select is off. Otherwise, it's going to select whichever layer you click on, and then it doesn't let you select the group. I already did lock. We talked about layers. Sometimes you want content in your layers to blend between the layers. So what that means is here I have this ghost woman in a ghost costume and this background image. I would like her to blend a little bit with the background. So my layer has this option here called opacity. Opacity means opaque, which means you cannot see through it. So like this wall is 100% opaque, you can't see through it. Whereas that window over there is like 15% opaque. You can see through most of it. There's like a little bit of grime or shine or something like that. You can still see it, so it's not like invisible, but it's not as opaque as like the wall is, okay? So if I lower this opacity from 100 to 50, she becomes semi-transparent. If I take her from 50 to 0, she becomes entirely invisible, or she's 100% transparent. Let's talk about selecting content. Sometimes you're going to want to select content and bring it to other documents. So I'm going to make a selection here by grabbing the rectangular marquee, I call it the rectangle because that's what it's called in Photoshop. Here they call it, I think, just the rectangle tool. And what this allows me to do is if I click and drag, it makes a selection. The selection is this dotted line. If I want to manipulate this, I can use the move tool and move it around. If I want to stop moving this, I can deselect this by going to select, deselect, or Command D or Control D on your keyboard. Okay. Let's say I wanted to copy content between layers, or between compositions. What I could do is, with a selection, I could go to Edit, Copy, go to the project where I would like to put the content, and then Edit, Paste. And did it do it? Allow. Let's try that again. Let me try making a layer first, and then pasting. Let's try that again. Edit, copy. Edit, paste. Oops, I don't know why I'm having issues. Let me try one more time. Edit, copy, edit, paste. That's weird. Okay, I guess I'd used copy merge for some reason. Don't ask me why. All right, so let's go back. I'm going to redo this, make my selection with the marquee tool or the rectangle tool, edit, copy merged, go to my other project, and I can go to paste or Command V, and it brings it in. Usually we'll bring it in as a new layer. So I'll call this, rectangle. Another tool I can use is what's called the circle tool. It's called the elliptical tool in other programs. I can get that, or the ellipse tool. I can get that by clicking and holding on this tool, choosing the ellipse select. This is like the rectangle tool, except it makes a circle as opposed to a rectangle. I can click and drag to make a selection. If you like it to make a perfect circle, I could hold down Shift, meaning the height and the width are the same. If you want, normally when you make a selection, it starts from the upper left. If you like to start from the center, you can hold down the Option or the Alt key. I can also add and subtract to my selection. So up here, this is called replace. And what that means is every time I draw a new select or ellipse select, it replaces the old one with the new one. I could use this add to select, or I guess they call it unite in this program. What that'll do is add to my selection. I could also use, what do they call it? Probably delete or something. Minus is probably what they call it. All same tool as in Photoshop, but just try not to get sued for naming conventions. Anyway, this would subtract from my selections if you want to have like a hole in your thing. Edit, copy, merged. Edit, paste. Okay, so I copied and pasted, made its own layer here. Finally, the one thing about the rectangle and the circle, or the ellipse, whatever you want to call in this program, select, is that they're based on predefined shapes like rectangles and circles and such. Sometimes though, you're going to have a more organic object and you want to be able to just make a basic selection that's not circle or rectangle based. So I'm going to use this tool here called the lasso tool. I'm going to click and drag that around. Now I'm going very fast. You would want to go slow and be a little bit more specific. With the lasso tool, you have to go back to its origin point. Lassos, just like in real life, a lasso is a piece of rope that goes out, comes back to itself, and forms a slip knot. If the rope didn't come back to itself, it wouldn't be a particularly very useful lasso. So in the same way, your lasso tool, you always have to come back to the origin point. That creates the selection. If you don't come back to the origin point with this tool, if I were to just let go, like say here, it's going to go from my last point, which is here, to my original point, which is the lower left, in the shortest distance possible, which is a straight line. So that may not be what I want. I'm just going to go around my whole object. You can see how I'm making a more unique shape. It's not a circle or a square. And then let's go to Edit, Copy Merged, and then go to my other document, Edit, Paste. And that gave me a lot more of a customized, unique selection then. All right, any questions on anything I talked about? All right, why don't you guys try that out? That was 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. This is my crash course on how to draw and select things in the photo editor. We're going to use this when we make our own custom materials, textures for materials, the relationship to UV mapping. If you already know how to do this in Photoshop, cool. You can use Photoshop if you want. It's fine with me. This is for people who've maybe never taken Photoshop, who don't have access to Photoshop at home. They can use this program online for free. Come on. All right, everybody. Let's move forward. So let's talk about how does this relate to 3D modeling? So I'm going to open up Blender. And I'm going to select, I'm going to select this cube. And I'm going to make a material for it. I'm going to call this material puppy texture. And just like you guys did for homework, I'm going to go to my base color and add an image texture. And I've already found a picture of a puppy. And this is what it looks like. Now, at the moment, you can kind of see how the puppy picture is kind of like weird. It's like kind of going over the seam here, and it's like part of it's disappearing. And unfortunately, due to what I've taught you so far, that's about as far as you go. You wouldn't be able to like be more specific about where you're placing the picture of the puppy necessarily. But now I'm going to teach you guys something called UV editing. This is going to teach you how this works so that we can be more specific. So what you have to understand is that you can take a three-dimensional model like this cube and you can flatten it into a two-dimensional plane. So you can take this and flatten it, be like this kind of T shape. You guys might have done this at some point, like elementary school or something. So the idea is like, programs like Photoshop or Photopea or whatever, they're two-dimensional programs. They don't draw in three-dimensional space. So we can't take them into Photoshop and draw on them. But if we could know how our model unwraps, like the way a box unwraps, we could then go, okay, well, let's draw here, let's draw there, draw that. And then when you reposition them back up, then the drawings are exactly where you want them to be. So how does this work? Well, let's open up. Exercise 1. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select, actually, I'm going to take this into UV editing mode. And the way you can do this is you could either go under, the best way to do this. I can click on workspace and go under general UV editing. And if I did that, it's going to give me basically 2 windows. One that's the 3D viewport and one that's the UV editor. You could also just, if you know how to divide up panel spaces like we've talked about, oops. I could right click, vertical split, and then switch this one or whichever one to the UV editor. So what you have to understand about the UV editor is it's 2-dimensional. And what it will do is if you take a model and you select it, oops. And I highlight it, I get this. So it's very similar to what I just had, right? And if I click off of the model, you can see it disappears. To get it to not disappear, I'm going to click on this thing in my UV editor. Kind of looks like a double-ended arrow, and it's called UV sync selection. And what actually happens here is that each one of these faces corresponds to my model. In other words, this face corresponds to this part of the model, this corresponds to this part of the model, this corresponds to this part of the model. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get out of this and I'm going to apply a material. Let's make a new material. And I'm going to use the image that I gave you in the called, I think it's under references. Is it this one? No, sorry, it's called cube texture. And when I click and add this, this is what cube texture looks like when I drew it. And I'm going to go back to, I'm going to go back here, and you can actually see this is without the image. And I'm going to open the texture back through it by clicking on this little image icon and going to cube texture. And you can see that my image is corresponding here to different parts of the cube. So this green area is corresponding here. This yellow area is corresponding there. This purple area is corresponding there. And actually, you can edit the UV map if you want to. The UV map, in this case, I already gave you, but you could edit it. So for instance, just like we have vertices and edges and faces in modeling, if I select an edge, let me turn off the texture for a second. I could take this and move it down like that. Okay. What would that cause? Well, see how like this area, it's kind of hard to see, but like what's essentially happened is I've extended this face so that it's no longer just having the yellow area, but now there's some blue area here. You guys kind of see that? And if you look at that face on the model, see how it's like, so by changing the UVs around, it changes the mapping of how each face goes to the model. If I were to take this and move it over, well, now this face should be getting part of this red area too. You can kind of see that there. This one over here, or this is actually getting part of the red, part of the blue, and part of just a blank area. Okay. If you want, you can actually, besides moving edges, you can move entire faces. So if I use face selection, just like moving faces in UV editing, I'm going to take this face and place it literally. Oops, it's not going to let me do it. I used to be able to separate the whole thing. I guess you can't do that now, but. I'm going to select this and use the rip region. And I think that should work. Now when I move it, no, it's still doing it. Maybe they've changed it. It used to be that you could move the faces individually without moving the rest of the geometry, but maybe you can't do that anymore. Doesn't, oh, I guess I can. Okay, I just can't have UV sync on. All right, I'm gonna take this and move, maybe not. Still can't seem to do it. Take this, no, all right. Maybe I can't do that to Foley anymore. I used to be able to just move it independently. Okay, but I guess now you can't do that. As a bit of a change from the last version. Anyway, so I can move these around. I could probably like take these and kind of move them. You know, now I'm putting this on top of that, which would change the way this looks. Now I get two blue ones because both of these are sitting on top of the blue. But what if I'm going to get rid of this cube texture drawing. Let's say instead of trying to fit my UVs to my drawing, what if I want to do the opposite? What if I already knew what my UVs were and I wanted to use that as a reference so that when I take it to a drawing program, I could use that as a reference. So what I'm going to do is in my UV editor, I'm going to highlight all of these. And under the UV menu, I'm going to go under Export UV Layout. By doing that, it's going to save a file, probably like a PNG or some sort of raster file. In your settings, just make sure all UVs is set. That means all the UVs. And this is your dimensions. You can see it's currently setting it to 1024 by 1024. If you wanted some other dimension, you can set that there. I'm going to call this cube UV. By the way, why is it UV? Because XYZ was already taken, so it's UV XYZ. It has nothing to do with ultraviolet, by the way. This is why they call it UV mapping. I'm going to hit export. All right, that should give me a photo. There's my cube UV. What I'm going to do is let's go to Photopea, and I'm going to open up that drawing. Okay, I'm going to get something that looks like this. Now, I should get a layer called background or something. I'm actually going to lock it because I don't want to move the UV. This is just a reference to the original, but it's if you move it, that doesn't mean it moved in Blender. So I want to be careful not to move them. And then I'm just going to make a new layer. And I can just start to draw. So maybe I'm going to make this one red. Maybe I'll make this one like a gradient. This one I'm going to, whoops, a doodle. Oh, I guess I didn't add any here. Let's use those new ink splatters. Okay, I want the ink splatter on that one. One, two, three. And then finally, make a little design. Oops. Okay. All right, I'm going to save this. So to get something out of Photopea, I'm going to go to File, Export As, and I recommend you have to use some sort of non-proprietary format. So you can't use a PSD for Blender because Blender doesn't accept proprietary, but you could use like a JPEG or a PNG or something like that. So I'm going to save as PNG. I'm going to call this cube texture. Hit save, and I'm just going to put it on my desktop for now. And what I'm going to do is, let's go back. I'm going to remove my old picture, and let's add in that new picture. And you can see how it relates to my model here. So here is, if I highlight this, this is this part of the model. If I highlight this, this is this part of the model. If I highlight this, this is this part of the model. All right, so I can be very precise with how I draw things to make sure that they're showing up in particular spots. So for instance, maybe I want this not to be here, but over here, I would just go back to my drawing, move this part back over here, export the image again. Oops, so, maybe I'd use my eraser tool. And tidy this up a little bit. Maybe I want the splotch mark. Oops. There. I'm going to download this, save it again. Cube texture, save. Place my old one. And I'm going to remove this image, bring back the new one. And then there you go. I click on this. That's what we get. All right, so UV mapping relates to when we apply a texture being very precise about where exactly to which faces each part of the texture is going. It's saying this part of the texture goes here, this part goes here, this part goes here, this part goes here. All right. Any questions about anything I talked about there? What's up?
How would you export it again? Like,
You mean the UV map?
yeah.
Once you have it laid out, what you can do is highlight it all, go to UV in the UV menu, and go to the very bottom where it says Export UV Layout.
Oh.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, why don't you try that out? That was exercise 1. There's some instructions if they got a little tricky for you. But essentially you're, replacing, you can first load the one I give you and then, export your own, take it to a program like Photoshop or Photopea, use it as a reference to say what you want appearing at which part of the model. Yeah. Extra modifier from the model.
So then once we finally have like that one new, I guess unique thing, like how do we export it back into here? It's like the same, we just.
So you would bring it back as an image. So this is your beautiful up, and then whenever they're saved it, that would be how you bring it in.
And then you just go back to the UV editor and it'll just show up there too, right?
It would, yeah. If it doesn't, you can load it through this little icon. There.
And it's with
It
the,
should show up there once you apply it as a, so I can see it.
yeah, but then on the screen, you'll just. I'd have.
Well, you have to have it selected model. So we select them. Select the model. So it's- select the model.
I think it's the heavy trick, so yeah, for sure, okay.
Keep in mind that it's probably not gonna let you use a PSP, that convert it to like a PNG or something. All right, why don't we take a little break, about 4:25, come back in 10 minutes, we're gonna do more practice of exporting UV maps out of Blender, something like Photopea and working with it. And then I'll teach you guys how to actually create your own UV maps, so like, how do you take a model and unwrap it? Okay. Let's talk about that, okay? All right, let's do a little more practice. So this exercise 2. I have this cone, and if I click on this cone, here's the UV map, and I'm going to click on it. And sometimes you may not, when you get a UV map, you might want to move around elements. And I'm actually going to increase the size of this. The reason why you might want to increase it is so that some things can have a little more clarity. All right, I'm going to export this by going to UV export layout. And I'm going to call this cone UV. I'm going to make sure that all UVs is turned on. And I'm going to export it to my desktop. And I'm going to bring it into Photopea as a reference point. All right. And I'm going to find a picture to use as a background for the bottom. Let's try a floral pattern. And let's bring this in, and I'm just gonna select some using my rectangle tool, edit, copy merged. I'm gonna lock this layer, edit, paste, oops, allow. Resize this a little bit. I don't want it affecting here, so I'll use the eraser tool and kind of erase on that. And select. All right, I'm gonna make a new layer. Let's fill that with a color. All right, turn off the original. Let's download this. Let's use a PNG, and I'm going to call this cone texture. Hit save. Save it to my desktop. Go to Blender. Apply this as a material by clicking on material, making a material slot. I'll call this cone material. Add an image. All right, put this into material preview mode. All right. You can see how it plays out here. So if I wanted to move this around or something, I could move around my UV map, but see how it's corresponding to my image that I created. I'll do one more. Here we got more complex kind of UV map, which is Suzanne, the monkey. Hers is maybe not as obvious as some of the other ones where it's like, this is the face. So like, you know, this is the face of the monkey. This is the left side. And then this is the right side. These are the ears. This is the other ear flattened out. And then these are actually the eyes. Okay. So once again, I'm going to highlight all this. UV, export, UV layout. Save it to the desktop. I'm going to call it monkey UV. And let's bring that into Photopea. All right. Let's try to find some fur, maybe. So if I type in fur, I'm going to use fur. It's kind of like a texture. Maybe like this. I'm going to copy this, copy merged. Let's go to monkey UV and paste. And oops, I'm going to resize this by using free transform. This is going to be like the face. Texture behind the face. All right. This is like going to be the nose right here. Put the drawing on another layer. That's my bad. Anyway, this is the mouth. Let's make a different layer for that in case I want to change it later. And I'm going to do cheeks. Okay. These are the eyes. So I'm just going to make these white background. And then these parts in the center. Okay. These are going to be the ears. So I don't know, maybe I'll use some more. And these are going to be the interior of the ear. All right, I'll download this. Save or export as, I should say, PNG monkey texture. And go back to Blender. I'm gonna take the monkey, create a texture. So let's make a texture, material slot, new material, monkey material, and I'm gonna add this as a image texture. All right. Here's my weird looking monkey. Put this in, if I select this, you can see how this relates to everything. All right, any questions about anything I did there? All right, so did you guys try that out? Just more practice in exporting many maps, drawing with them. Talk about how to make our own UV map. So in the past couple, I gave you the UV map, but we'll talk about how we take a model and unwrap it. All right, well, we're gonna talk about how we can take a 3D model and build a UV map. Now, the past 3 examples I gave you the UV map, and you kind of just, use that. Sometimes you won't have that, or you may not like the UV map that you got and you want to like, set up your own. So we'll talk about how to do that. So I'm going to select, this is exercise 4. I have this model here. And if you click on this thing called data, which kind of looks like a little green triangle, if you go under UV maps, currently blank, meaning there's no UV map on it. So I'll just click on the little plus sign to add a UV map. And what's actually happening here is if I click on this, you might notice that like it's just kind of showing me one square as opposed to like the little, T-shaped thing I was getting before. And that's actually, if I select this face, and this face, and this face, and this face, it kind of looks like they're all here. What's actually happened is by default, when you add a UV map, what it might try to, it's probably going to try to take that polygon and make it as big as possible. So what's actually happening here is like all 6 of them, I can't do it, the word is wet. If I can do it, it's like, they're kind of all stacked on top of each other, like that, basically. Okay, which is kind of not really what I want, because whatever design I put here, it would go literally on every single face. Okay, so I'm going to try to change this. So, as I kind of showed you when I built the box, you can take a flat piece of thing and fold it up, right? But you can also kind of go the other way, which is like, well, okay, if I had this as a solid, let's say I had an Amazon box or something, what would I need to do to start flattening it out? Okay, so if this was like a box, it's like, well, if I cut here, I cut here, and I cut here, that would create that, right? So it's like a flat, but then I still have this part, which is still 3-dimensional. So then I'm not going to do it because I don't actually go in this box, but I can cut here, 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 and then this would fold out that way, this would fold out that way, this would fold out that way, and I'd have a flat 2-dimensional layout. So in other words, I'm saying where I would cut, and then if I were going to cut it, that would like lay my thing out. If I have a model like this, what I can do is when it's in edit mode, I'm going to hit a side here or a seam or sorry, not a, this is an edge in my model. And what I'm actually going to do is in your 3D viewport under, there's a menu called UV. I'm going to click on that and there's an option that says mark seam. And when you do that, you'll see that that edge becomes red. Okay. If I were to highlight multiple and do the same thing again, I've marked all those seams, right? So what the seam means in Blender is I'm going to unwrap this, and this seam tells Blender this is like a cut point. So really what I'm doing is I'm telling Blender, cut here, cut here, cut here, cut here, which would take this and kind of separate it. And then the rest of it's kind of like an open box. So I'm going to highlight everything, and I'm going to go under UV. Looks like they got some new options here. Sorry, this is kind of new because it didn't used to look like this. I'm going to go under unwrap angled basis. Okay. And let's do unwrapped angled based. Okay, I guess that's close. It used to just be called unwrap in earlier versions. So what happened here is that this is my top, or sorry, this is the top that I did that. And then this is like this weird, like kind of thing here where it squished it down, you know? I don't like that, so I'm actually going to undo this. We can do it again. So actually, I don't want to fully cut this off because I want to keep this one piece. So what I'm going to do is if you make a seam and you don't like the seam that you made, I'm going to do UV clear seam, and that removes it. So what I'm doing is I'm cutting here, here, and here. That's going to cause this to flip up. But I also want to cut here and here. That's going to let this one kind of fold out to the side. And I also want to cut here and here for the other side. Okay. And now when I select everything and I do UV unwrapped angled base, it kind of was nice to me and it unwrapped it for me and I get something like this. Okay. Then what I could do is export this, you know, just like we've been doing, use it as my basis. So this is one method, which is to to set up seams of where you are going to unwrap your model. Another way is if you highlight your model from whatever angle you're at, I could do UV project from view. So if I have this highlighted, project from view, see how it's like literally showing me that way. Now, in this case, this is probably not what I'd want to do because what's actually happening here is if I put a picture here, it would actually affect the back and the side. Okay. So I don't really recommend using this. I did this on purpose to like show you kind of an extreme example. But normally what you might do is you might want to put the camera like right kind of 90 degrees to the thing that you want to do this to. So it's not at a weird angle. Like if it was like the face of a character and you want it to like be flat to the camera, you know what I mean? Kind of situation. Let's do one that's a little bit more complicated. I'm actually going to make a new one. Let's try to, I'm going to try to unwrap, say, a more complicated one like the monkey head. Okay. So I'm going to go to UV editing mode, which kind of, and I'm just going to delete. I'm going to start again. So I'm just going to delete the UV map and start again. So they're all this. So I could project from view. I could try to like make some seams and cut it. Another way is like you don't have to unwrap everything at once. You can try to just select parts of your model and unwrap that part and then unwrap other parts of it. So what I'm going to do is like, for instance, I kind of want to use this face, but I don't want to affect the rest of it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to orthographic mode here. And I'm just going to go to edit. And I'm just going to select the face. I'm gonna use the lasso tool. Okay. That looks pretty good. There's a couple faces here I might want to grab. I kind of didn't get some of those interior ones. All right. That looks, maybe some of these ones over. This is like the eyeball. Didn't quite get caught. All right. I'm gonna go back to the front view. And what I'm gonna do is do UV, project from view. And it's only gonna affect the ones that are selected, which is just the face. And that looks pretty good. And I'm just for now gonna take the face and like move it off. Okay. Now maybe, so I got that part done. Now I'm gonna try to do everything but the face. Let me do an inverse. Select invert. I also don't really want the ears. I think the ears are going to need some of, I kind of like those to be separated. So I'm going to undo those. It's, well, all right. Maybe I should just do the ear separately. I'm going to do the ear first and try to get as much of that ear as I can. Oops. This is also why it helps to have not an overly complex model, so you don't have to select like 1,000 small faces. Now I could do this from projection, which so I might want to be like, oh, well, this is like kind of flat to the camera. The problem with that though is then if whatever I do to the front would also probably hit the back. I might want to unwrap this though. So if I go under UV, there are these options that say things like cube projection, cylinder projection, sphere projection. These are sort of built-in ways of taking a selection of polygons and kind of unwrapping them flatly. This one might be better as a sphere. So I can see what it looks like. If you don't like it, you can always undo it. So if I do sphere projection, that's my sphere. Maybe not that one, but maybe cylinder. Nah, still don't like it. Cube, that's probably a little better. I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't like any of those if I'm being real. So maybe I will just do this one as a projection, but I don't want to do the back. Maybe I'll do the front as a projection and then, so let me turn off these ones in the back because I don't want those to be included. Maybe we'll do the other ones later. All right. So let's do another kind of project from view. So there's that ear. Maybe the rest of it I will, you know, maybe that one I'll just do as a cylinder. If you accidentally have ones, if they get what would happen is if I accidentally unwrapped ones again that had already been wrapped, they would go with whatever the new wrapping is, essentially. If that makes sense. This would go with like the new one. So try to be as careful as you can, but if it's not necessarily the end of the world or anything. But all right, so I'm trying to get rid of these because I've already unwrapped those. That looks pretty good. Maybe that one I'll unwrap as a cylinder. It really doesn't look very good. All right, I'll use that one, even though it's not great. So that's the ear. All right, and then I will do the other ear. So am I still in? Oh, I'm in negative mode, that's why. So I'm using the lasso tool, boom, boom. I'll do this one as a projection too. So I kind of want it flat to the camera. There's no 100% way. I mean, everyone has their own kind of way, but I think like this is a little better. And then I'm going to do the back of the ear, kind of like I did the other one as a, oops. I like to do the more minute ones first. Okay, that's the ear. Let's unwrap that as a cube. I'm moving it off. That leaves just the rest of the head, which is basically this part. So, all right. It's pretty much that minus the ears. That's why unmapping or unwrapping can take a little while to get what you want. That looks pretty good. I do want those two. I'm just gonna go fast for the sake of this not taking much longer, but I'll unwrap this probably, even though it's kind of looks, it's really kind of a sphere, you know, it's not quite a sphere, but it's really what would it be? So let's do a sphere projection. It's like I have a couple left, but whatever, I guess I have that's left. I don't really even care. Unwrap as a cube. All right. So then what happens is it's like, okay, now let's take all these parts and put it back. It has to fit here. And this becomes, which is the most important parts? Most important parts are really like the face, followed by the ears, then probably the head. Then these are like the lowest. So I would select these, move it. I can scale it. Just make sure they fit within this window. Like I said, the ears are the second. If you want, you can rotate stuff too, if that helps like fit everything. Like I might want to rotate this like a little bit to fit a little better. You can use the rotate tool. The head's the next part. This is the general cranium. This is like the ears and the rest of the head. You're trying to maximize your space as much as possible. And then this is the rest. Oops, I didn't do that. This is the rest of it, which is less important. So I'm just going to make it smaller. Keyboard shortcuts, S for scale, G for grab. Now, if I was going to be better, I'd probably put them in this part, but and redo it again. I'm just too lazy at the moment, but you hopefully get the idea. Okay. And I'd do some maneuvering, put that up there, get a little more space for stuff, but generally that's kind of the idea. And then once you get this set up, you export it just like you did. You get the Photoshop, use that as your basement. Okay, so this is a more complicated, way of doing it where I'm kind of breaking it down into smaller parts. Kind of focusing on what parts I think are the most important that people are going to look at, like the face. So you guys have probably seen this online, like you probably looked up like a game character. And it like probably looked like something weird, like something like this. Let's try to find a bigger one. You're like, what's this all about? So it's like, this is how this would match up. It's like, well, this is the person's face, that's the hair, this maps to their body, you know what I mean? All the parts are mapping. This is like for a full character, not just the face, but it's like, this is like how they would draw it. It would map, the UV map would map to the different parts of every model. This is kind of like showing it. Where it's like, this goes there and this goes, I think that's their foot, or I don't know, it's hard to tell. They should have done a better job painting it, but same idea of like it's mapping to different parts of the model, essentially. This one's a little better, I think, of sort of showing it. Where it's like, that goes there, this goes there, I think. These are like different parts of the model. All right. Any questions about anything I talked about here? So we're going to do a lot of practice of this. Don't worry if it seems like, this is a lot to take in. I am giving you guys a lab to work on, or a couple labs. So first I have a lab. This will be due next Wednesday. It goes over basically everything we did today. It goes over how to export a UV map if it's something like Photopea, bring it back, apply some texture. Also goes through the basics of unwrapping like we just did. It's a 3-part lab, so there's 3 separate things you're giving me, but it's all one lab. And then the second part is, these are both due not this Friday, but next Friday. I'm going to give you an object. There's like 3 objects you can choose from. There's models. I'd say like they're not simple models, but they're not horribly complicated either. And then your job is to unwrap it and then create a texture for it. Okay, so there's like a TV and a suitcase or something, I forget, but there's 3 relatively not overly simple, but not complicated models. You'll choose one, unwrap it with the method I showed you, create a texture map and apply it. Okay, and both of those will be due not this Friday, but next Friday after next. Okay, any questions about that? I haven't posted it yet, but there's a bonus or extra credit. Extra credit is if you want to take your spaceship that you guys built earlier in the semester and create a UV map for it and then put a texture, I'll give you extra credit for that. Don't do that instead of doing this. That's more important. Do that first, and if you got like extra time because you finished early, then do the extra credit. Okay. All right, y'all. First class times is lab time. You guys have 2 labs that are due for me today, which is materials and the modifier lab. Next Monday is just going to be more, we'll go over UV mapping again, more practice of it. And then next week we'll get into lighting and cameras and rendering. Okay. They're starting to get to the point where you can actually make a decent 3D rendering. Okay. Slowly but surely we get.
Here.
There. Yeah.
This is good. I resubmitted it. I don't know if you have it.
I had an early version. Where, I'm being honest, it looked like you left in a prompt.
Right. So I was having a little bit of trouble with it the second time. What I was trying to do is that I like, because one of my classmates was in the same thing too. So what he did was like, you know what, try putting it in there and see if it's better. Because the first time, like the very first time I did it, it didn't look good. So I was going with the first profile part. So I was okay, well, I can try to spice it up a bit. And then I did put it in the prompt to try to see if it looked correctly, but it didn't do it for me. See, this is the second attempt that I did.
Okay.
And the first time I did it, it didn't look like this. Because if you
Yeah, I looked at it blankly and I was like, and then I saw it,
Right.
I was like, okay, that looks like a prompt.
Right.
You know, I wasn't born yesterday, I know this kind of thing. So here's what I'm gonna say. With this class, the reason, I think I said this in like the first day, which is like, if this was like an advanced computer science class, I actually wouldn't care. Because in real life, if you're working in a job, nobody cares if you literally write it yourself, or whether you use AI for it. But the thing is, your guys aren't there. And the thing is, like, the analogy I kind of gave is like, when I was learning math in elementary school, it's not like calculators didn't exist, they
Right.
did. But we weren't allowed to use it and we had to do it by hand. Now, as an adult, do I use a calculator? Yes, of course, because everyone uses a calculator. But I also understand how basic math works.
Right.
So if I put 1 + 1 into a calculator and it says 100, I don't just blindly accept it because I understand how math works. You guys, unfortunately, are not at that level yet, where you should do stuff via ChatGPT because you don't even know what it is. You know what I mean? Now, if you guys were like high level, you've done like a bunch of courses like this, it's like fine, I don't care. Like I do it too, because I can look at it and be like, oh, okay, boom, 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 I see what it's doing.
Right.
And if I need to make changes or whatever, I know how to do that. But you guys aren't at that level yet, because this is an intro level course. So that's my thing about it. I'm not trying to be a buzzkill or whatever, or make you guys do needless, work or anything. But it's like learning with a calculator. It's like, if you learn with a calculator, you don't learn math, you just learn how to input stuff with a calculator.
Right.
And you know, what I'll say is you have plenty of time to do that on your own. You don't need to take this class, put stuff in the chat.
Right, but,
You know,
yeah, on to that too. I did this one first, and then I recently
Okay.
got that and turned it in, but for that Betty's Bakery class, I think I submitted recently too.
mhm.
That was fooling myself,
Okay.
because after like I had it in there, and then going off of that, and then resubmitting off this one too. Going off of that Betty's one too, now I went back to this one and went, oh, maybe it wasn't really, because it wasn't, like I said, it was kind of hard at first.
Right.
But then after going back to this one and then doing it like everything, I
Sure.
realized, okay, yeah,
I mean, here's the deal. The reality, I don't know what you want out of this class, if anything, but the reality is that if you were to get a job in this area, and you only know how to chat GPT, it may take them a day or two, but they'll figure it out.
right,
Like, I would be like, because if I give you something and you like couldn't do a very, what I would consider a basic thing, like, you know, swap out the sentence, it's like, this person showed me this portfolio, but they don't know, like, 1+1's not adding, it's not adding up, you know what I mean? So it's like, I'm not trying to be like a stickler here or anything, like, and like I said, I'm not even against per se the concept of ChatGPT as a digital tool per se, but. And it's not, it's kind of, code's always been around, like you could always find code, even for ChatGPT, like forums where people would
Right.
post code and people would copy and paste code. And,
right,
you know, there were programs like Figma that would output code from like a image or whatever. But a lot of times, the thing about it is, and it's the same thing, it's like, I want you guys to understand at least the basics.
correct, and I do,
So that like, if you have to go in, for some reason your client doesn't like something, you gotta go change it,
Right.
you can do that, and it's not like, oh, I gotta put it back into ChatGPT and hope
Right.
it gives me the result that I want.
Right.
And also, I'm not just trying to be whatever, ChatGPT actually doesn't understand good code.
Right.
Like, I've done like, I wouldn't have done it that way, or like, I get what it's doing, but this is actually really inefficient way of writing code. And so that's kind of the thing here, where it's like, so for this class. And for projects, I would want you guys to do your own stuff.
right,
And it's kind of like, I know what to look for, like, certain things I'm like, that seems like a very advanced thing.
Right.
Taking an intro class, like, you know, like, if you were a computer science person, you're probably gonna wait for it, but I know you're not. So I'd be like, well, how did that, you know, like, what I usually tell people for more advanced classes is, if I think that someone's using ChatGPT, I will say, it's my right to ask you to go line by line and explain to me what's happening.
right,
Because if you can't, it's like, well, then you don't get it.
right,
You know what I mean? And that's the point of this. I would prefer personally, you do something simpler that you understand.
right,
And try to do something cool to impress your friends or me or whoever you're trying to impress, because in use ChatGPT personally. Now, I'm not saying eventually you won't get to that point where you can just use ChatGPT and implement it in your workflow if that's what you want to do, but like I said, you know, in my opinion, you guys aren't quite there yet. That's like third or fourth year of computer science. So,
right,
you know, one intro class you haven't even gone through one project yet. I don't think you guys are at that level yet. You know, that's just my feeling.
right,
So that's all I'm gonna say. If you've done it, then I'll take your word on that, but you know, in the future, I do notice those things, and if I feel like something's been done with ChatGPT, especially if it's a bigger project that's worth more, because my opinion, right? I don't say plagiarism, but like, you're using an unfair advantage, because I did say in the requirements of projects, that, you know, use of
Right.
JavaScript, anything like that. So I'm trying to keep everyone at like the same level, I think that's the fair way to do it.
Right.
Because some people may have background in JavaScript or whatever, and like they could do things that you guys couldn't know it. I might ask you, how did you do this? And if I feel like you're not explaining it in a way that shows that you understand it, then it's like, you know,
yeah,
it's no different than if you just copied an essay, you know, from Wikipedia, it's
Right.
pasted into your English. It's like, to me, that's, you know, for now, I consider that the same. And like I said, in the future, you know, you're a science person, you get a job, doesn't matter. Because in real life, actually, we use something called a content management system, which actually writes each other. No one actually writes it by hand. But the point is that if I wanted to explain how the content management system works, I could be
You'll
like,
be able to.
this is, it's making an article, it's making an article tag, there's the, you know what I mean, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's doing it in a script way as opposed to literally hand coding it, but it's still, I could explain it.
Right.
And say how, and if you looked at the template, you'd be like, oh, okay, this is how this relates to what I taught you guys, you know, that's all.
Okay. Sure. And then one more question too, sorry.
Hmm?
For the style CCS two, sometimes, I don't know, I'll be able to show you the. Oh, is it? For the zoo one,
Hmm?
you wanted us to, I know it's two different ones, where the first one is just your normal straight up like this explanation of the actual website. Then the style CCC one, where that text file is basically where your header is, where it's like the color wise, whatever text you make it to, then we're so forth. So my other question for you also is that for this, like right here, does it really matter if I have like a header here? I don't think it really does, right?
You talking about the literal headers?
No, not the header tag, the one above it, like where like the section text, no, not just this, like that green text.
Oh, this is just the comments.
Right.
You don't, the comments,
Yeah, the comments for me, right?
yeah, comments, the browser doesn't care.
This thing too, because sometimes if I'm going like, if there's like a lot here too, I'll get confused about like where it is too. Like I know for the portfolio too.
Sure.
It says right here for the image thing, because I would get confused about where the personal one, where the vector one would be.
Right.
So I kind of had to make sure that, because you already care what it said, right? As long
No,
as it's
I mean, the comments are comments for any coding.
Well, I'm gonna make that.
Right there, HTML, CSS, whatever, is so that other programmers,
can be
you can write notes to yourself and to other people.
to show like what it.
Yeah, so like, you know, you're like, this is where the logo goes, so like, you know, to be honest, that's kind of what ticked me off, cause like, I know ChatGPT will write
Right.
comments like that, because they're telling you how to like swap out the code.
Right.
And they usually put it in comments. That's kind of what glued me in there. But yeah, you might find in a real website, like. A lot of times there's like sort of. There's like these templates that websites use, there's like different areas. And like people will put in comments to like sort of show getting of one area.
Right.
You know, so it's like. So it's like end feature, you know, like these are like
Right.
plugins they put in. They're notes to other people.
So that people like.
So like, oh, okay, there's whatever SP is, it's probably their content management system. This is where it starts, and this is the start of the body, the end of the body. Whatever skeleton is, it's the ad body. You know what I mean? So they're just for they're just for the other developers.
Right. Okay. Alright.
Okay.
Alright, for sure.
Cool. Oh, go ahead. Okay.
Yeah.